Fantastic. All right, so uh, I would like to start by stating that I am presenting from unceded Kumeyaay land. This work is also greatly impacted by the current genocide and ethnic cleansing occurring in Palestine, and we will keep fighting for a free Palestine. The work I'm presenting today was conducted on indigenous lands, Kumeyaay land in Turtle Island, Tāmaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, and Finland. While this thesis, to my understanding, did not take place directly on Sami land, I would like to acknowledge the Sami peoples as indigenous stewards of the land in Finland. I acknowledge and honor the past, present, and future indigenous stewards of these lands. This acknowledgement is just a starting point to work towards true decolonization, reparations, and land back. My master's in dance pedagogy thesis is titled Dreaming to Life, Collective Liberation, Cultivating Caring Communities Through Dance and Movement. This work occurred from January through June of 2024. Here is a brief interview of what we will be discussing today. I will summarize the work, provide context for the dance workshops, elaborate on what happened, define the research method and praxis, describe what I have learned, and imagine the implications of this learning. There will also be time at the end for Q&A, so please keep your questions for the end, and I hope to have a good ending discussion. All right, so here's a brief summary of some things. So abolition and collective liberation, or a world where all people are free, are core values which are woven into everything that I do and everything that I am. In my thesis, I bring these core values into my dance teaching. I utilize action research to examine and develop my own pedagogical praxis, seeing how implementing liberatory education praxis can bring these values into the dance studio. I organized and taught contemporary dance and partnering community practice workshops in 3 different countries. Through these teachings, I investigate if liberatory education praxis can be used to cultivate caring communities. I question, how can liberatory education praxis support the cultivation of a caring community within dance education? How does this contribute to bringing the collective liberation dream to life? Now let's look at where the workshops happened. The first and second workshops were open to the community and consisted of local dance and movement community members ranging in age with varied dance and movement histories. While the third workshop was with the second-year dance students at Riveria, a vocational school in Outokumpu, Finland. I intentionally crafted and planned the workshops, taking into account these varying contexts. So what happened? Each day of the workshops was broken into 2 sections. First, there was the contemporary dance class, which was followed by partnering community practices. The contemporary dance classes consisted of a check-in circle, a warm-in, like shaking or yoga flows, set movement exercises for warming up the body, floor work and inversions done across the floor to build up to more challenging movements, an ending combination which brought together previous movements we had already done, and an ending circle to cool down. During the contemporary dance classes, I focused on applying liberatory education praxis to see how my teaching could best support the students' learning. I examined how my teaching practices affected the cultivation of community or holding the space to foster an environment where students feel they are included and belong. Many of the practices and the language I utilized are not unique to liberatory education praxis, and they're used by many other dance educators across many styles of dance. I have found that these practices are a way to bring abolition and collective liberation values into dance education. Then the second part of the day was the partnering community practices. These practices varied across the workshops. I chose similar starting points for each workshop, but then allowed the practices to develop based on what actually happened, what interested the participants, and the group discussions during the workshop itself. On the slide, you can see there's a list of some of the partnering practices we did. Through the partnering practices, which involved both touch and observation, the groups explored how being in community can radiate and affect their approach to dance, movement, and maybe even life outside the studio. These practices come from many different dance, movement, and somatic practices, which I have encountered through my many different teachers I've had in various settings. For example, some of them I've done in contemporary dance class, or Deborah Hay improvisation practice, or contact improvisation, yoga, and many more. Throughout the workshop, I didn't claim these practices as my own. I gave credit to those who I've learned them from and tried to give context throughout the workshop. So now we'll go into the research method and praxis that were used. I used action research, or a research method utilizing action reflection cycles to examine my pedagogical praxis and ensure it aligned with my values of abolition and collective liberation. There's a very small figure in the top right corner of the slides that shows this action reflection cycle, going from planning to action to observation to reflection, and then back around to planning. So how do I define abolition and collective liberation? For me, abolition is a praxis and mass movement used throughout history to dismantle oppressive systems by recognizing that reform will not change the inherently oppressive systems, as they were built with the sole intention of dehumanizing, separating, excluding, and oppressing certain types of people, creating hierarchies of valuing some more than others. Thus, these systems and ways of living must be abolished and dismantled, while simultaneously creating the alternatives. Collective liberation is a praxis that works towards creating a world where all are truly free. Just as our struggles are intertwined, so is our freedom. In order to be truly free, we must collectively all be free from oppression. If a single person is left behind, then we do not have collective liberation. With all of that, I wondered, how can I bring abolition and collective liberation into the dance classroom? I was inspired to implement liberatory education praxis as a way to do this. My understanding of liberatory education praxis is rooted in Bell Hooks's Education as a Practice of Freedom, which is deeply influenced by Paulo Freire's Emancipatory Education and Critical Consciousness, and Thich Nhat Hanh's Holistic View of Beings from Buddhism. Liberatory education praxis is a praxis or action with reflection that supports agency, holistic growth, and acknowledges lived experience, including societal systems and oppressions which shape the learning environment. To best articulate this with clarity, I chose to define 4 elements that comprise liberatory education praxis. First, we have education as a practice of freedom. It is educating in a way where systems of oppression or domination are not reinforced, and education can liberate people, allowing them to have agency, autonomy, and the ability to affect change in the world. Then we have engaged pedagogy, which is teaching in a way that promotes active engagement from both students and teachers in what is being learned and an interest in the people in the class, where they are able to think critically and relate the material to their lives and society at large. Holistic view of beings is viewing each person as a whole, including a connected and integrated mind and body, and their lived experiences, knowledge, and culture. On a larger scale, it's also understanding the interconnectedness of humans with all of the world around us, or what Thich Nhat Han calls interbeing. And then the fourth element, which is probably I'd say the concentration of what this thesis work was on, was cultivating community, where creating a space and environment where everyone is included and everyone belongs. Inclusion is about intentionally building a space where the multiplicity of human experiences is considered, allowing for a wide range of diverse differences to easily exist in the space. Belonging is when people can truly be themselves and they do not have to change or conform themselves to fit in. These four elements are by no means comprehensive or the only components within liberatory education praxis. They are only my perspective and what I have found most important within my own pedagogical praxis at the moment. While my learning is a continual process which extends into many directions, I will focus on three main insights that I gained which directly relate to liberatory education praxis and cultivating a community. Through my observations, reflections, and the students' feedback, which was gathered through an online form, I found that my pedagogical praxis fostered feelings of inclusion and belonging, supported holistic growth, and cultivated caring communities. My teaching practices fostered a space that supported people's holistic growth and where people felt they were included and belonged, which allowed for the creation of caring communities. So those first two learnings that I found really are what made it possible to support the cultivation of caring communities. Practices like the check-in circle allowed each person to be seen and heard. They had an opportunity to share their name, pronouns, and share about themselves through a check-in question. And sharing in this way allowed us to each get to know each other and was a starting point for inclusion and belonging. My intentional use of language while teaching further supported inclusion and belonging. All three workshops included movers from a wide range of different dance and movement histories, which called for an attention to the types of terms and words I used. In the workshops, I openly shared with the participants that I was working with using non-codified dance terminology. This attention to the types of words used in class acknowledged a wide variety of dance and movement backgrounds, bringing a holistic view of beings into the dance studio, and avoided marginalization of those who did not have the same dance training as me, which happens to be ballet or Western dance and movement experiences. And so what I found is supporting inclusion and belonging created this foundation from which caring communities could be cultivated. Based on the feedback I received from the students and my own observations, I found that the community agreement practice positively affected and shaped the space. At the beginning of each workshop, we took time to co-create a set of guiding principles, which we wanted to bring into the space. It allowed people to share their needs in order to participate and defined how we wish to interact with one another. They are shared values, which everyone agrees to and can evolve throughout the workshop. So we revisited these each day of the workshop, and we could continue adding or changing as we went. And then lastly, the various partnering practices supported the cultivation of caring communities by allowing time for being together, which fostered interactions and connections amongst the group members. It was time for practicing care and support with one another. In summary, I found that the cultivation of a caring community required sustained amounts of time be spent interacting with each other. Spending time co-creating the community agreement set the foundation for trust to be built so that the group could go into the partnering practices. Then these partnering practices provided the space, time, and framework to continue to foster relationships amongst the group. There was no way to rush the creation of community, and the only way to get there was to spend the time together, getting to know each other. And I believe that these dance and movement workshops provided an avenue for us to do just that. So what could be the significance of my learning and its potential implications? I have seen and experienced how the values and ways of being that come from abolition and collective liberation can foster a space where people can connect, interact, and trust one another to be able to learn, grow, and take risks together. Intentionally interacting with each other in a supportive way allowed us to create a caring space together. As one of the community agreements from the third workshop states, we create the space together. Allowing time to create caring communities is something that has been used by many abolitionists and social justice organizers, but I feel it is lacking in many dance education spaces. And so I start to question how dance educators facilitate time for cultivating caring communities in the dance studio. Time and space for caring communities to form is also lacking in Western societies. There seems to be a constant push for efficiency and speed. And while these ways of being can be useful in some cases, in my experience, efficiency and speed comes at the cost of marginalizing those who cannot or do not conform to it. I feel there's a lot of rigidity and inflexibility built into our social structures, many times intentionally, to exclude and oppress certain types of people. Instead, if we built our systems and ways of living in a way that chose to value trust and support every human and the more than human world in reciprocity, then I believe we would be in a much different world. This is not a brand new concept, but something that has been and is continually practiced by many cultures around the world, including Indigenous peoples. Experiencing this kind of attention and caring during these workshops has changed how I live my daily life. So I wonder, what if we applied this kind of active listening and caring attention into society? What would the world be like? What next? I would like to expand on this work, bringing it to a wider variety of people. And I feel while these workshops created caring communities within the dance studio itself, I feel I have not yet been able to extend these caring communities out of the dance studio into the world at large. I feel the workshops planted seedlings for living in alternative, unoppressive ways, and I would like to continue this work to find ways of extending it to greater society to create societal change. I want to continue to develop the partnering practices and expand on the workshops to a wider variety of people in different communities. I'm inspired to question, what if every person in the world experienced this type of workshop? How would this change how we live in the world? And although realistically, I cannot make every person experience this type of workshop, I can let these dreams affect how I live and what I choose to spend my time on, seeing what change I can create. I will continue contributing to the long legacy of those who have been doing abolition and collective liberation work to dismantle systems of oppression and domination and create alternative ways of living until all of us are truly free. These are the references used throughout this presentation. I'm going to drop actually a couple of links in the chat, including links to my thesis and also a link to my website. So hopefully, go. Great. And then please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to continue building connections and dialogue around abolition, collective liberation, and decolonization. And then lastly, thank you to the organizers of Dancing with Decolonization. I truly appreciate the time you have put into creating this important event. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to connect with you all again in the future. Thank you, and free, free Palestine.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We do have a few minutes to take questions and have conversation. I might actually start off with just a resonance from just about the very beginning today, much earlier today, where one of our speakers was talking about the commodification of wellness, and how wellness in like Western society is very much sold, but Western wellness in the Filipino society that she was presenting from was more communal, was more about collective engagement and freedom and community. And so that's just one thing from like the very beginning of today to tie things around a little bit that started to resonate with me as you were talking about taking time and space in this community building practice and taking things slow and kind of resisting this capitalist urge to be super effective or efficient and rush through, right? And so I thought of that a lot of ways as like a real definition of what wellness is, rather than the commercialized idea of you need to be well so you can work more. You need to be well so you can get done faster, right? Yeah.
Uh, I also wanted to thank you, Nicole, because something we in dancing and in the academics, we normally forget about being kind to ourselves in this same sense that Andy's talking about. And you make me think about what is really being kind to us, and also being kind to you as an educator, because sometimes we are the educator, we have to be fine, we have to be perfect for them, and we care for for them to be okay, but sometimes we forget about ourselves. And I'm still processing a lot of what you were saying right now, and I'm definitely gonna read your thesis, because I think now more than ever it is important to take care of ourselves in order to be a good educator, be a good researcher, and to give something back, I think. And to be a dancer, I mean, that's a whole other thing because you have to be okay to dance. But in this part of the academic, thank you very much for making us reflect on this.
Great. Thank you so much for the thoughtful comments. Yeah. If there's any, I guess, brief questions, I think we have about 5 minutes. So, um, do my best to answer anything like that. And then, of course, like I said, if there's anything comes up for you later, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to stay connected and chat about things. So, yeah, you can find I think my contact details on my website. There's like a contact form and everything. So,
Yeah, I maybe I'll pop in with one more thing because as you were talking, you being next to Nicole Perry in this conversation was like great because there are
it's
so many
great.
resonances between your works as well. Um, and I guess I kind of wanted to hone in a little bit more on uh these kinds of like forms of agreements that we make within classrooms or education spaces, maybe, um, and how you might view that from an not necessarily academic context, but from an education context and working with students, particularly young students. I believe you were working primarily with people who were 18 or older,
Yeah,
but maybe you have a perspective on working with youth as well,
I
people below the
do.
age.
Yeah. So during my program, I also had opportunities to teach children, and leading up before I went to my master's, I did a lot of teaching children. But I actually worked at a primary school in Finland. So I worked with third graders, fourth graders, and eighth graders. And while the class size was really big, I had about 40 to 50 students at a time. And their classroom teachers were there to help kind of keep the space organized so that that many students could, move together safely. But um, having that many students, I couldn't really implement these community agreements because having every student then bring in even just one would take up many hours to like really go into them and let everyone share. So in those instances, a lot of times it can be a little tricky. I'm still figuring out like, okay, how does this work with kids, especially in such large groups? Um, I have done it in smaller groups with like even as young as I think a camp that I taught last summer, kids were about 6 years old. And so instead of them bringing in individual things, we kind of had three agreements that were kind of pre set out that were understandable to 6 year olds. And then um, each day we would look at them and I would ask them to give examples of like how do you show these things of like treat others how you would like to be treated. How would you show that? And then, the kids could join in and say give examples like of how they would do it. And so I think like I said, I haven't quite figured out how it works with kids, but it is something that you can still bring in uh, as a way of, bringing that agency, kind of like what Nicole was talking about earlier in her presentation, like taking ownership of what your learning experience is going to be like. And I think it really is helpful, especially for kids. There's something really nice when they can bring their voice and it's not just being told to them as a rule. I avoid the word rule. Guidelines is okay, but I prefer agreements because there's like an active consent and active um, participating that has to happen with an agreement. So, yeah.
Well, then I want to thank you once more for your presentation and taking this time and space with us today.